Welcome back to reading. Today's read aloud. Back to Pax. We are ready for the 5th chapter. All right, so far we have heard from Pax and we've heard from Peter. What happened last time we read? Peter was running away. And what happened his first day running away? Emma?
A guy saw him and asked if he needed anything. And he was staring at him until he actually got out of sight.
Right. He was at a hardware store trying to buy a flashlight. And this guy's like, well, why aren't you in school, young man? And then he left, and the guy's like, school's that way. So he had to walk towards the school. And where did he end up hiding, Madeline?
In the dugout.
In the baseball field dugout. All right. Now he said, I'm just going to close my eyes and rest here for about an hour. And what did we think maybe would happen instead? Cadence?
He would fall asleep.
He's going to really fall asleep hard, right? And not know when he's going to wake up. All right. Well, today we're back to Pax. So we will have to wait a little bit to see what happens with Peter. All right. Chapter 5. This is my territory. Pax was so startled that he nearly toppled from the oak trunk he'd been drowsing on. All day he'd been keeping watch and seen nothing larger than a grasshopper. And now here was a bright furred vixen. Okay, a vixen is a female fox. He had never seen another fox before, but he knew. Younger and smaller and a female, but fox. Instinct told him also that the way she held her ears and tail erect meant she expected his submission. I hunt here. That's what she's saying to him. Pax felt an urge to run back to his crude nest and press himself into the remaining stalks, as if retreating to his pen. But he resisted it. What if his boy came back and he wasn't here? He flattened his ears to show he meant no threat, but that he would not leave. The vixen paced over, and Pax drew in her scent, as familiar as his own, but also exotic. That means something you've never smelled before. She sniffed and bristled in distrust at the human scent on him. Why do you think a wild fox would smell human on a fox and think, I don't trust you? Angie?
Because she's wild, and I think that maybe the female thinks he's dangerous because I'm pretty sure she was a female, so maybe she had babies and got stolen from a human.
Could happen. Humans don't always treat animals the right way, right? So a lot of wild animals, rightfully so, are scared of people, right? They should be scared of us. Do people hunt foxes sometimes?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Poachers.
Yep. Hayden?
Maybe she's been stolen when she was a baby, and maybe it's because people hunt with foxes, and she may think that he's working with them.
Yeah. So if he smells like a person, she's like, I don't trust that smell. I don't know why you smell like people.
Okay.
Noah?
Because a lot of foxes look at people.
Right.
If she smelled fox on him, she would think like he's one of her pets and she's hunting. They're hunting.
Yep. Real quick, Angie.
Maybe they'll see like. I think that maybe the female fox maybe had a person too, and she got treated really badly.
Okay. So we don't really know for sure yet, but she does not trust that smell. All right. Pax had been born with the same instinct as well, but distrust is no match for kindness administered consistently and unmeasured, especially in creatures new to the world. Pax had only been 16 days old when Peter had rescued him. A fatherless, motherless curl of charcoal fur, his eyes barely opened, and it wasn't long before he'd come to trust the quiet, gangly boy who'd brought him home. The vixen poked her pointed snout in to sniff him more closely and bristled again. The scent is my boy's. Have you seen him? Pax shared the most important features of his human. The naked round ears. Why does he describe his boy's ears as naked? Madeline?
Because his have fur.
Yeah, there's no fur on them. The towering legs, so improbably long that Pax always feared he would topple over when he ran. The black curled hair that grew in different lengths, then became short again. Why is the hair getting short sometimes? Noah? Haircut. No humans are here, but they are approaching. Just then, Bristle's head rose as if jerked on an unseen wire. Her ears pricked, trained on a slight rustling in a nearby tuft of broom sage. Her rear began to twitch. Okay, if you've ever seen a cat or something about to pounce when they start doing the little wiggle thing in the back and then they jump and pounce, foxes do that too. Her rear began to twitch, gathering energy. She sprang high and then paused tight over her black nose, dived into the grass with a flash of white tip tail. Pax sat up, alert. In a second, Bristle's head reappeared, and in her jaws was a wood rat. She leaped clear out of the grass, bit through the rat's neck, then dropped it to the ground. Orphaned before he'd been weaned, that means finished with drinking mother's milk, Pax had never eaten raw prey. His hunger rose at the blood scent, and so did his curiosity. He took a cautious step closer. Bristle growled, and Pax retreated to watch from a safe distance. He grew hungrier as she crunched bites. He thought of the brimming comfort of his kibble bowl, the pleasure of Peter's hand-fed treats, and the ultimate reward, peanut butter. He needed to find his boy. His boy would feed him. Before he could ask about the approaching humans, Bristle picked up what remained of the rat, a single hind leg with its long tail, and stalked off with it dangling from her jaw. Pax watched as she wove her way between the grass tufts, becoming only flashes of flame and white. Leaving. He was swept by the memory of his human's car roaring away in its stinging spray of gravel. Just before she slipped into a fringe of ferns at the wood's edge, she paused to glance at him over the shoulder. At that moment, a sharp snap from a fallen oak startled her. It was followed by a red streak of fur that hurtled from the dried foliage, flew over the weeds, and landed on her back. Pax flattened himself. He could hear the vixen's yips as she scuffled with her attacker, but they sounded more irritated than afraid. He poked his head up. Bristle pounced on a ball of fur and bit it hard. To Pax's surprise, a smaller, skinnier version of herself unfurled at her paws. Pax was stunned. Never had he suspected that foxes might soar like birds, whose swooping arcs were not like any movement he himself could achieve. The little fox flipped to his back and gave his belly in submission, but this seemed only to make Bristle angrier, her chattering now punctuated by jabs and nips. Pax bounded over, overcome by curiosity. The skinny fox startled at the unfamiliar human scent and looked over Bristle's shoulder. His eyes widened when he spied Pax, and he scrambled to his paws. "Friendly," he announced to Pax. "Brother, but not littermate of the vixen. Play!" So who is this other fox? Hayden?
Maybe her sister.
Well, brother, but yes. So this is the vixen's brother. And did you notice what Pax is starting to call her? Because he started calling her a name. Bristle. Okay, why do you think he started calling her Bristle? Eric?
Because she kept eating stuff.
Okay, she kept eating. And bristling means your fur all stands up on end when you're getting angry. And was that how he met her? Yep, so he calls her Bristle now. Bristle bared her teeth and snarled at her brother. "Dangerous. Stay away." Pax ignored Bristle's warning posture and met the greeting. "Friendly. You flew. Bird?" All right. Was the fox really flying?
No.
Do you think it just jumped really high? All right, and Pax has never seen that or tried that before. The little fox bounded back to the fallen oak, then sprang onto its trunk. One fork of the dead tree angled up. The small fox walked lightly along its length. He looked down to make sure Pax was watching. Pax dropped and tucked his paws under his chest, but it was hard to keep from leaping onto the tree to try it for himself. He had climbed the walls of his pen, of course, but he'd never been higher than at 6 feet. His brush twitched. That's what you call the fox's tail. The vixen stalked a few steps away and then dropped to the ground. She rolled onto her side to gaze directly up at her brother, her love for him obvious now. He was the runt. He's small, but he's tough. I don't want him with me when I hunt, but he follows me. She tossed her head and growled at Pax, as though blaming him for her brother's play. The runty little fox stepped out along the branch, tail poised for balance, then coiled himself and leaped out over the head of the earthbound foxes. He landed in a clump of burdock beside the road and then burst out covered in burrs. What are burrs? Madeline?
Those little, like, pokey sometimes, like, things that you can pick on your dog.
Yes, so if you go in the woods or your pet goes in the woods, they stick all over you, and they've got sharp little spikes. You have to pull them off. Emma?
There's boards in my backyard.
Yeah, I have some too. Hudson?
So I've been at Elijah's house because we're 2 houses away, and I've actually, I didn't see them because they were like small, and I accidentally touched it, and I'm like, ow, and he said, yeah, that's a thorn bush.
Yep.
It hurts pretty bad.
Yep. Hayden, real quick.
I've actually got one stuck in my hair.
It happens. Okay. Where am I at? Okay. He tore around in mad circles as if soaring had filled him with an excess of joy that had to be spent through his legs. So I'm thinking of like zoomies, if you've ever seen your pet run in
My dog.
crazy circles.
Yes.
All right. His sister pounced on him. Too close to the road. While she pulled the burrs from his coat, she scolded him for the recklessness of his flight. But Pax marveled at it. A good full 5 bounds he'd traveled without touching paws to the ground. He would try the feat himself one day. When Runt managed to get to his feet, he lowered his head and nuzzled his sister. She knocked him back to the ground, only Mockruff this time, and then sat on him, pinning him down. He struggled a little, but never really tried to upset her, and he protested only meekly when she began to groom him. Pax settled himself a respectful distance away. After a while, her brother now properly subdued and her irritation spent, Bristle retrieved the morsel of rat and dropped it in front of him. She lay down and began to lick her paws, then to clean the face with them. Pax edged closer, so low that his belly brushed the ground. The company of these 2 young foxes drew him, whether he was welcomed or not. Do you think Pax is starting to be lonely? Yeah. Bristle stretched out in a patch of slanting sunlight. Her damp cheeks glistened like the pumpkin-colored wood of the table where Pax's humans ate their food, brilliant against the white of her sleek throat. Pax looked over at Runt, who was sniffing the spot where Pax had slept. His coat markings were identical, but not as vibrant. His fur was sparse and tufty in places, and his hip bones protruded at sharp angles. So does that mean he's getting enough food? Probably not, if his bones are sticking out. Pax watched as Runt tossed the toy soldier into the air and pinned it down over and over. He had done the same thing as a kit. He trotted over and joined the game, and Runt welcomed him as though they had played together since birth. Bristle got to her feet. Bring it here. Her brother ignored her for a moment, but then, as if he had been judging the limits of his sister's patience, he loped over and dropped the toy at her paws. Bristle issued a throaty rattle at the soldier. Human, leave it. Home now, she ordered her brother. Runt leaned into Pax and braced his forelegs. Bristle sprang back to nip at her brother. He stinks of the humans, remember. Pax was startled by the image she communicated to her brother then. A cold howling wind, a mated pair of foxes, struggling with something that reminded Pax of his pen. Steel, but with jaws and clamps instead of bars. The steel jaws and the snowy ground were smeared with blood. Bristle tipped her head to assess the sky and sniffed the breeze, which carried the threat of thunderstorms from the south. Home. Runt lowered his tail and began to follow his sister. But then he turned back to Pax, inviting him to come as well. Pax hesitated. He didn't want to leave the spot his humans would return to. But dark clouds were rolling in, and just then, thunder boomed in the distance. He knew his boy would not venture out during a storm. He didn't want to think of getting drenched by the side of the road, alone. He tucked the toy soldier into his cheek and set out after the 2 foxes. Bristle turned when she sensed his presence. One night only, human stinker. That's what she's calling him, right? Because he smells like human. Pax agreed. He would follow his scent back to the road after the storm. His humans would come for him then. And once he found his boy, he would never leave his side. All right, chapter 6. We're back to Peter. Emma?
My paper's under the computer.
There you go. Sorry about that. Whoop. What happened here? Okay, chapter 6. Peter recognized the sounds before he was fully awake. The footfalls of the herd of just-released kids, their hoots, the thumping of their eager fists into gloves. He scrambled out from under the bench and grabbed his stuff. Too late. 20 boys in their coach were streaming down the hill. Up at the parking lot, a bunch of adults were overseeing the dismissal, and some of them wore uniforms. His best option was to join the dozen or so kids who were already scattered over the bleachers, heads bent together in clusters of 2 or 3, and blend in when they left. Peter climbed the bleachers to the top row and dropped his pack. A kid watching a baseball practice. Nothing could be more normal. Yet his heart skidded. Below, the coach started lobbing fungos into the field. The players were mostly the usual guys you expect to see on the ball field, all muscle and shout. Peter found the one he wanted to watch. A small kid with a straw-colored crew cut and a bleached-out red t-shirt, playing shortstop. All right, my baseball people, what is shortstop? Eric?
It's right next. It's in the middle of third base and second base.
Okay, so if you're picturing a baseball diamond, in between second and third is shortstop.
I know.
While the rest of the players scrambled around like puppies, this kid was a statue, hands poised waist high, eyes glued to the coach's bat. The instant Wood smacked Cowhide, he sprang. Somehow, he managed to reach every ball that came anywhere near his territory, even though he was so short that he looked like someone's tag-along kid brother. Peter knew he himself wasn't the only kid you'd expect to find on the ball field either, and he was even less at home in the dugout with all the shoulder punching and trash talking. But a baseball field was the only place where he felt he was exactly where he was born to be. The feeling that brought Peter was something he had never even tried to describe to anyone else, partly because it felt too private, but mostly because he didn't think he had the words to explain it. Holy came the closest, and calm was in the mix, but neither was exactly right. For a crazy minute, Peter sensed that the shortstop understood about that holy calm, was feeling it too, right now. The coach had taken the mound and was tossing puffballs. The batters were hitting sharp liners and grounders, and the outfielders were finally paying attention, or at least facing in the right direction. The shortstop was still the one to watch. He looked like he was stitched together with live wires, gaze ready to the play. Peter recognized that kind of concentration. Sometimes his eyes would actually go dry because he forgot to blink. So focused was he on every move of every player, and knew it paid off. Like the kid in the red t-shirt below him, Peter owned his territory on a ball field. He loved that territory right down to the cut grass, dry dust smell of it. But what he loved more was the fence behind it. The fence that told him exactly what was his responsibility and what wasn't. A ball fell inside that fence, he'd better field it. A ball soared over it, and it wasn't his worry to worry about anymore. Nice and clear. Peter often wished that responsibility had such bright tall fences around it off the baseball field too. When Peter's mother had died, he'd gone for a while to a therapist. At 7 years old, he had not wanted to talk. Or maybe he just hadn't known how to shrink that kind of loss into words. So even if you've not lost someone, when someone wants you to explain your sad feelings, sometimes it's hard to even know what words to use, right? It's hard to even talk about it. The therapist, a kind-eyed woman with a long silver braid, had said that was okay. That was perfectly okay. And for the whole session, Peter would pull little cars and trucks from a toy box. There must have been 100 of them in there. Peter figured later that the woman had cleaned out a toy store for him and crashed them together 2 by 2. When he was finished, she would always say the same thing. That must have been hard for you. Your mom gets into a car to go buy groceries, a regular day, and she never comes home. Peter never answered, but he remembered a sense of rightness about those words and about the whole hour, as if he was finally where he should be. And there was nothing else he should be doing except crashing those little cars and hearing that this must have been hard for him. Emma?
I think the mom died in the car crash.
Yep, she died in a car crash. You're right. So she went to the store and never came back. So you can imagine how hard that would be, right? We can all kind of think about how terrible that would be to experience. Madeline?
It's the same as in my I Survived book. The dad died because he got in a car crash.
Mm-hmm. So that can be very difficult. Hudson?
I've actually gotten in a car accident in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
and actually, I said that is my dad okay, and he said he's fine, which he actually wasn't fine, but he was trying to, because Finley was crying because the roof we hit a tree,
Mm-hmm.
and the roof of the car came down and hit Finley's head because we were like that and
Yeah.
that, and we actually had to leave the car, and police were investigating, and I went with my grandfather, and my dad went in the ambulance with my sister, and then my grandfather's old Ford Explorer, we actually have that right now.
Oh, okay. So you kind of know how scary that can be.
Yeah.
All right. I'm sure we got other car crash stories. We are running out of time. I got to finish really fast. Okay, hold on. And actually, we won't be able to even finish this whole chapter. So let me finish reading. Where were we at? Okay. Until one day, the therapist said something else. Peter, do you feel angry? No, he'd said quickly. Never. A lie. And then he'd gotten off the floor and taken a single green apple Jolly Rancher from the brass bowl by the door, exactly the way he did at the end of every session. That was the deal the kind-eyed therapist had made with him. Whenever he'd had enough, he could take a candy and the session would be over, and left. But outside, he kicked the candy into the gutter, and on the way home, he'd told his father he wasn't going back. His father hadn't argued. In fact, it had seemed a relief to him. But not to Peter. Had the nice therapist known all along he'd been angry that last day, that he'd done something terrible, that as punishment his mother hadn't taken him to the store, and did she blame him for what happened? We're going to have to stop there for today. All right, all of you at home, I will see you soon.